He first wolf found her footprints just before midnight. They were too small, bare feet, half frozen, and they ended at a ruined cabin buried deep inside Frostveil Forest. The giant Alpha King had come with 10 wolves to kill whatever creature had been slaughtering hunters along the northern border. Instead, he found a woman trying to hide a piece of stale bread behind her back. She looked no older than 20. Her cloak was stitched from old wolf fur. Snow clung to her hair. A faded scar crossed her cheek. And when she saw the Alpha King, she stepped backward with the panic of someone who had spent years running from the world. "Please," she whispered. "I don't have anything left to take." Then something impossible happened. One by one, the 10 wolves lowered their heads to her. Not in warning, not in submission to their king. To her. The Alpha King's hand froze on the hilt of his sword. Those wolves had been raised for war. They had never bowed to another living soul. The woman stared at them in horror. "No," she said, backing away. "You're mistaken." But the oldest wolf walked forward, pressed its forehead against her trembling hand, and whined like it had finally found someone it had been searching for. That was the moment the Alpha King realized the rejected Omega who had lived alone in the wilderness for 12 years was not hiding from the kingdom. The kingdom had been hiding from her. And when the wolves suddenly turned toward the trees and began to growl, he understood one more terrifying thing. Someone else had found her first. Winter had erased every path leading into Frostveil Forest. Snow drifted endlessly between towering pines whose branches bent beneath layers of white, swallowing the sky until morning and evening became impossible to distinguish. The forest breathed differently from the rest of the kingdom. Its silence was alive. Every gust of icy wind carried whispers older than the royal bloodlines themselves, as though unseen spirits still wandered beneath the frozen canopy. The people of Blackthorn Kingdom believed nothing survived there. Travelers avoided it. Hunters refused to cross its borders. Even seasoned alpha warriors claimed they could feel unseen eyes following them whenever they ventured too close. They called it cursed. They were only half right, because deep inside that endless wilderness, someone still called it home. Lyra Ashmore slowly pushed open the wooden door of a tiny cabin hidden beneath centuries-old pine trees. Frost clung to the rough timber walls, and smoke curled lazily from a crooked stone chimney that somehow still resisted the brutal northern winds. She stepped outside barefoot. The snow should have burned her skin. Instead, she walked across it as naturally as breathing. Years of surviving Frostveil had taught her things no human teacher ever could. She knelt beside a narrow stream that refused to freeze completely. Crystal water flowed beneath sheets of ice like liquid silver, reflecting her pale face back at her. White hair spilled over her shoulders. Clear gray eyes stared into the water. There was no hatred inside them. Only exhaustion. Only loneliness. Only the quiet acceptance of someone who had stopped expecting life to become kinder. A movement behind her made her smile. Not fear. Smile. A massive, white wolf emerged from the trees. Its fur shimmered beneath drifting snowflakes. Golden eyes watched her with unmistakable affection. The enormous creature lowered its head until it rested gently against her shoulder. Lyra laughed softly. The sound barely rose above the whispering wind. "You worried again?" She stroked the wolf's thick fur. "I'm only getting water." One by one, more wolves appeared. Gray wolves, black wolves, white wolves, old wolves with silvered muzzles, young wolves bounding playfully through the snow. None showed aggression. None challenged her. They gathered around the lonely Omega as though protecting something precious. Years ago, the wolves had found a crying child abandoned beneath these same trees. Since then, they had never truly left her side. Lyra filled a wooden bucket before noticing fresh blood staining the snow nearby. Immediately her expression changed. One of the younger wolves limped toward her. An iron hunting trap remained clamped around its front leg. The terrified animal whimpered despite trying to appear brave. Lyra's heart tightened. "Oh!" She rushed forward without hesitation. "You poor thing." She knelt in the freezing snow, ignoring the cold seeping into her clothes. The injured wolf flinched, not because it feared her, because pain had become unbearable. Lyra carefully rested one hand against its trembling neck. "Look at me." Her voice remained impossibly gentle. "I'm here." Slowly, the frightened wolf obeyed. Its breathing steadied. Her fingers glowed. Only faintly. Soft silver light spread beneath her skin like moonlight flowing through water. Warmth radiated from her palms. The trapped wolf stopped shaking. Its frightened heartbeat slowed. The metal jaws suddenly seemed weaker somehow. With one steady pull, Lyra forced the rusted trap open. The wolf stumbled free. Blood still covered its leg. But the wound had already begun closing. Not completely. Just enough to save it. The surrounding wolves stared silently, as if witnessing a miracle they had seen countless times, yet still could never understand. Lyra smiled weakly. "I wish I could do more." The silver light faded. Immediately dizziness washed over her. Healing always carried a price. She steadied herself against the nearest tree. No matter how many years passed, her strange gift always left her weaker afterward. She never questioned why. There had been no one left alive to answer. Far beyond Frostveil Forest, the world sounded completely different. Steel collided against steel. War horns echoed across frozen valleys. Smoke blackened the winter sky. Thousands of soldiers stood knee-deep in blood-stained snow. At the center of the battlefield, one man ended the war. King Kael Draven towered above every warrior surrounding him. Nearly 7 feet tall, wrapped in black wolf fur armor reinforced with dark steel, he looked less like a king than a force of nature given human form. His enormous great sword dripped crimson. The enemy commander fell to his knees. Around them, silence spread. No one dared breathe. Kael slowly lowered his weapon. His silver eyes remained cold, emotionless. Victory brought him nothing anymore. Not satisfaction. Not pride. Only another battlefield. Another pile of bodies. Another night of nightmares waiting beyond sunset. One frightened soldier whispered, "The giant Alpha." Another dropped his weapon. Then another. Within seconds, the remaining enemy army surrendered without another strike. Kael said only 3 words. "The war ends." Nothing more. No celebration. No triumph. He simply turned away. Because winning had stopped feeling like victory years ago. Hours later, the royal army crossed snow-covered mountain roads toward Blackthorn Castle. Beside Kael walked 10 enormous wolves unlike any living creatures in the kingdom. Their eyes glowed pale silver. Their movements were perfectly synchronized. Legends called them the Moon Guardians. No king had commanded them for centuries. Yet they followed Kael, without chains, without commands, without fear. Suddenly, every wolf stopped walking. All 10. At exactly the same moment, Kael frowned. Their ears stood upright. Their noses lifted toward the northern wind. Then, a deep howl rolled across the mountains. Another answered. Then another. Soon dozens echoed together. Not threatening. Calling. His oldest commander rode closer. "My king." Kael looked toward the distant forest. "That's Frostveil." The commander's face turned pale. No wolves have howled from those woods in decades. Before Kael could answer, one of the Moon Guardians stepped forward. The largest among them. Ancient scars crossed its enormous body. Without warning, it bowed its head toward the forest. The remaining 9 followed. Kael had never seen such behavior. Not once. The Alpha King's heartbeat slowed. Something inside him stirred. A strange pull. A sensation impossible to describe. As though someone unseen had whispered directly into his soul. Far away, inside the royal capital, the kingdom's oldest oracle collapsed beside an ancient stone altar. Her trembling hands opened a forgotten scroll sealed for generations. Words began glowing across faded parchment. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "The abandoned child. The wolves shall find her. The king shall follow. The moon remembers." Back inside Frostveil Forest, Lyra froze. The wolves surrounding her lifted their heads together. Every bird fell silent. The wind stopped. Even the trees seemed to hold their breath. She felt it. Someone was coming. Not hunters. Not frightened villagers. Something Different. Something powerful enough to make the entire forest listen. Miles away, Kael tightened his grip on his sword. Into Frostveil. The commander stared in disbelief. My king, no army enters those woods. Kael mounted his massive black horse. They do today. The 10 Moon Guardians sprinted ahead without waiting for orders, disappearing between towering snow-covered pines. For the first time in 12 years, the Forgotten Forest welcomed strangers. And neither Lyra nor Kael realized that before the day ended, destiny would force them to stand face to face. The forest felt different. Not louder. Not quieter. Older. As though every ancient pine had awakened from a 1,000-year sleep. The snow no longer drifted aimlessly through the air. It circled between the towering trees in slow spirals, catching the silver moonlight until the entire forest shimmered like a forgotten dream. Even the cold seemed to hesitate, waiting for something it had anticipated for centuries. Lyra stood motionless beside the frozen stream. Her fingers tightened around the worn wooden bucket hanging from her hand. The wolves surrounding her had transformed. Moments ago they had been calm, resting beneath the trees. Now, every one of them stood alert. Their ears pointed toward the southern trail. Their muscles tensed beneath thick winter coats. Not with fear, with recognition. The oldest white wolf stepped in front of Lyra, shielding her body with his massive frame. She rested a trembling hand against his shoulder. What is it? The wolf released a low rumble. Not a warning. A greeting. Then, heavy footsteps echoed through the forest. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Branches bent beneath tremendous weight. The air itself grew heavier. An alpha aura. Stronger than anything Lyra had ever imagined. Her breathing became shallow. Her pulse thundered inside her ears. Memories she had buried years ago clawed their way back into the light. Hands shoving her toward the forest. Voices calling her cursed. Her mother's tears. Her father's silence. The final words she had ever heard from her own pack. Run and never come back. Every alpha she had known had brought pain. Why would this one be different? She instinctively stepped backward. The wolves immediately adjusted their positions around her, creating a living wall of fur and muscle. Then he appeared. King Kael Draven emerged between the towering pines like a mountain carved into human form. Moonlight reflected from black steel armor etched with ancient runes. A dark wolf fur cloak billowed behind his enormous shoulders. His sword rested across his back, nearly as tall as an ordinary man. Snow settled upon his black hair, without melting. His silver eyes searched the clearing with practiced precision. Nothing escaped them, until they found her. Time stopped. Kael had expected many things beyond the borders of Frostveil. A monster, a rogue alpha, a sorceress, an ancient beast. Instead, he found a girl who looked as though winter itself had shaped her. Barefoot, thin, wrapped in patched wolf pelts. White hair flowing across her shoulders. Gray eyes filled with quiet fear instead of hatred. She wasn't standing behind the wolves. The wolves were standing behind her, protecting her. For one impossible heartbeat, neither moved, neither breathed. Then the impossible happened. The 10 Moon Guardians slowly walked past their king. Kael frowned. Fenrir, the oldest guardian, ignored him. Another wolf passed. Then another. One after another. The legendary guardians crossed the clearing. None acknowledged their Alpha King. Instead, every one of them approached Lyra. The ancient white guardian reached her first. Without hesitation, he lowered himself onto one knee. His massive head bowed before her. Silence swallowed the forest. The remaining 9 guardians copied him. 1, 2, 3, until all 10 legendary wolves knelt before the Forgotten Omega. Kael stared. Impossible. These wolves had served only kings chosen by destiny. They had never bowed. Not once. Not even to him. Yet now, their loyalty belonged somewhere else. The silver crescent-shaped mark hidden beneath Lyra's shoulder suddenly burned. She gasped softly. Warm light spread beneath her skin. The wolves released quiet whines of recognition. Kael felt something tighten painfully inside his chest. Not pain. Recognition. like hearing a forgotten melody remembered only by the soul.
His heartbeat changed. Once. Twice.
Then synchronized with hers. He couldn't explain it. He didn't want to, because explanations could not exist for what he was witnessing. Lyra slowly stepped backward. No. Her voice barely rose above the whispering wind. No alpha comes here without a reason. She looked directly into Kael's eyes. What do you want from me? Kael opened his mouth. Nothing came. He had spent years commanding armies, negotiating treaties, passing death sentences without hesitation. Yet before this frightened Omega, words abandoned him. Finally, he answered quietly. I don't know. Lyra's expression tightened. A king who didn't know? She had trusted lies before. She wouldn't again. Her hand drifted toward the oldest guardian wolf. I won't go back. Kael frowned. Back.
To people.
There was no anger in her voice. Only certainty. They always hurt what they fear. Those words struck harder than any blade. Before Kael could answer, a sharp whistle split the air. The oldest guardian growled. Too late. Dozens of black arrows exploded from the surrounding trees. Down. Kael lunged forward. His enormous body slammed into Lyra just as arrows tore through the clearing. Wood shattered. Snow erupted. Several wolves leaped into the attack. Steel clashed against claws. Masked assassins dropped from the branches, dressed entirely in black leather marked with the crimson crest of a serpent. Not soldiers. Professionals. Their leader shouted only one command. The witch dies. 3 assassins charged Lyra simultaneously. Kael's sword left its sheath in a single violent motion. Silver steel flashed. The first attacker never reached her. The second flew backward after Kael's shoulder crushed his ribs. The third ducked beneath the king's blade, only for the oldest guardian wolf to seize his arm between crushing jaws. Chaos erupted. The peaceful clearing transformed into a battlefield. Lyra stumbled backward. Then she heard it. A cry. One of the younger guardian wolves collapsed with an arrow buried deep beneath its shoulder. The wolf whimpered. Without thinking, Lyra ran toward it. Lyra! Kael's warning echoed behind her. She ignored it. An assassin raised his sword above her unprotected back.
Kael roared.
The sound shook snow from the trees. He reached her a heartbeat too late, but the assassin never completed the strike. 5 forest wolves crashed into him from every direction. The attacker disappeared beneath fur and fangs. Lyra dropped beside the wounded guardian. Blood stained the snow. Her hands shook. No. She pressed trembling palms against the wound. Please. Silver light burst from beneath her skin.
Not faint this time. Brilliant.
Moonlight poured from her fingertips like flowing water. The entire forest glowed. Every wolf lifted its head. Every tree reflected silver. The wounded guardian's breathing steadied. The arrow slowly pushed itself free. Bone mended. Flesh closed. Even Kael stepped backward. He had witnessed powerful healers. None had ever done this. The assassins froze in horror. The prophecy. One whispered. It can't be. Their leader snarled. Kill her before the mark awakens. They charged together. Kael moved first. His alpha aura exploded across the clearing. The sheer force of it drove weaker assassins to their knees. His silver eyes burned with something far more dangerous than rage. Protective instinct. Not toward his kingdom. Toward her. Every strike became absolute. Every movement precise. Within moments, the surviving assassins fled into the darkness. Silence returned, broken only by heavy breathing, falling snow, and Lyra's exhausted heartbeat. She collapsed to one knee. Healing had drained nearly everything she possessed. Before she touched the ground, strong arms caught her. Kael held her effortlessly. For a long moment neither spoke. Then he looked into her tired gray eyes. You'll die here. She smiled sadly. I've survived 12 years. Alone. Yes. You shouldn't have had to. Her smile faded. No one had ever said those words before. Not once. Kael looked toward the endless forest. Then back at her. Come with me. She shook her head immediately. I belong here. No. His voice remained calm. You survived here. There was a difference. I can protect you. Lyra slowly pulled away. I don't need another alpha deciding my life. The words carried no hatred, only scars. Kael nodded. For the first time in years, he did not issue a royal command. He simply stepped closer. Then, before every wolf in the clearing, the giant Alpha King lowered himself onto one knee. He removed his sword and laid it upon the snow. I am not asking as your king. His deep voice softened. I am asking as a man who believes the world has already taken too much from you. Lyra stared at him in stunned silence. Even the wolves seemed to stop breathing. Then, hidden high among the frozen branches, a lone masked spy watched everything. Every word, every impossible moment. The spy quietly disappeared into the darkness. By sunrise, the royal capital would know one unbelievable truth. The giant Alpha King had knelt before a rejected Omega, and the kingdom would never be the same again. Dawn broke over Blackthorn Kingdom beneath a sky the color of cold steel. The first rays of sunlight touched the towering obsidian walls of Blackthorn Castle, turning its countless spires into jagged silhouettes against the pale horizon. Hundreds of silver banners bearing the crest of the moon wolf fluttered in the icy wind. From a distance, the capital looked magnificent. Up close, it felt like a kingdom built on secrets. The castle gates slowly opened. Thousands of soldiers lined the stone road in perfect formation. Servants stood silently beneath carved archways. Nobles gathered on marble balconies overlooking the grand courtyard, pretending they had assembled to welcome their victorious king. In truth, every pair of eyes searched for only one person, the rejected Omega. Whispers spread faster than the winter wind. Is she really alive? I heard she controls wolves. They say the king knelt before her. Impossible. Nothing is impossible anymore. Lyra had never seen walls so high. The carriage rolled through the massive gates while she sat silently beside the window, clutching the worn wolf fur cloak she had refused to leave behind. The forest disappeared behind her. With every turn of the wheels, she felt as though another piece of her safe little world was being left behind. Outside, the streets overflowed with people. Children climbed rooftops to catch a glimpse of the mysterious girl. Merchants abandoned their stalls. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Men narrowed suspicious eyes. Some stared with curiosity, others with disgust. Lyra lowered her gaze. Crowds had always frightened her. In the forest, no one judged silence. Inside cities, silence became another reason for suspicion. Across from her sat King Kael. He hadn't spoken for most of the journey, yet he noticed everything. The way Lyra flinched whenever voices grew louder. The way her hands tightened around her cloak whenever someone looked directly at her. The way she instinctively searched every room for the nearest escape. She reminded him less of a prisoner, and more of an injured wolf waiting for another trap to spring shut. Without saying a word, Kael reached toward the carriage window and quietly pulled the curtain closed. The whispers outside vanished. The silence that followed felt warmer. Lyra looked at him in surprise. You don't like crowds. It wasn't a question. She hesitated before answering. They usually don't like me. Kael's jaw tightened. No one will harm you here. She gave him a sad smile. That's what people always say. High above the courtyard, Lady Seraphine Valcrest watched the carriage arrive. She wore a gown of midnight blue embroidered with silver thread, every movement elegant, every smile perfectly practiced. To the kingdom, she was grace itself. To the royal court, she was the king's most trusted advisor. To herself, she was already queen. For 7 years she had stood beside Kael. Through wars, through famine, through political conspiracies. She had learned every weakness inside the court, every noble's secret, every general's ambition. She had earned the throne. Then one forgotten Omega walked out of a cursed forest. And suddenly Kael looked at another woman the way he had never once looked at her. Not with desire, with concern. That frightened Seraphine far more.
Concern changed men.
Love destroyed kings. As the carriage door opened, Seraphine's emerald eyes finally settled on Lyra. This was the girl? No jewels. No noble posture. No confidence. Only pale skin, white hair, and frightened gray eyes. Seraphine almost laughed. This broken little creature threatens me? Then something unexpected happened. The 10 Moon Guardians entered the courtyard behind Lyra, ignoring every commander, ignoring every noble, ignoring even Kael. They formed a perfect circle around the Omega, protecting her. The courtyard fell silent. No one dared move. Seraphine's smile disappeared. That evening, the great hall glittered beneath thousands of crystal chandeliers. Long banquet tables overflowed with roasted pheasant, fresh bread, honey cakes, and silver goblets filled with dark northern wine. Music floated through the enormous chamber. Elegant, refined, beautiful. Lyra had never felt more alone. She wore a simple silver dress prepared by the royal servants. Despite the expensive fabric, she still felt like the frightened girl from the forest.
Forks. Knives.
Crystal glasses. Everything seemed designed for people who had grown up surrounded by luxury. She reached carefully toward a piece of bread. A noble woman nearby whispered just loudly enough to be heard. Apparently wolves never taught table manners. Soft laughter followed. Lyra immediately withdrew her hand. Across the table, Kael heard every word. He slowly placed his goblet onto the polished wood. The sound echoed through the hall. Silence followed instantly. Without raising his voice, he spoke. Who laughed? No one answered. Eyes lowered. Breath stopped.
Kael stood,
towering over everyone present. I asked. His silver eyes swept across the nobles. Who laughed? The noblewoman trembled. Finally she stood. Forgive me, your majesty. It was only a joke. Kael looked at her without emotion. A joke. She nodded nervously. Yes. His voice remained terrifyingly calm. Tell me. He stepped closer. If I laughed while your child starved in the snow. He stopped directly before her. Would you still call it a joke? The woman's face turned white. No. Kael's gaze never wavered. Then perhaps you should learn the difference between amusement and cruelty. No one spoke again. For the remainder of the banquet, not a single whisper dared rise against Lyra. She looked at Kael in quiet disbelief. No one had ever defended her before. Not even once. Something warm stirred inside a heart that had forgotten warmth existed. Days passed. Winter deepened. The palace settled into an uneasy rhythm. Kael quietly altered long-standing royal customs without consulting the council. Lyra's chambers were moved closer to his own. 2 moon guardians slept outside her door every night. Garden walks became part of Kael's daily schedule. Officially, he claimed the fresh air improved strategic thinking. Unofficially, he noticed Lyra smiled more whenever she could see trees. She rarely spoke, but little by little, silence between them became comfortable instead of awkward. One snowy evening they stood together inside the palace's winter gardens. Moonlight spilled through the glass ceiling, illuminating white roses that somehow bloomed despite the cold. Lyra knelt beside a flower whose stem had begun to wilt. She gently touched one frost-covered leaf. Silver light flickered across her fingertips. The flower slowly straightened. Its petals opened again. Kael watched quietly. You heal everything. She smiled faintly. Not everything. What can't you heal? For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then her voice became barely audible. Memories. Kael's expression changed. He understood that answer far better than she realized. That same night, the king screamed. The sound echoed through empty corridors. Servants rushed toward his chambers before freezing outside the door. No one entered. Everyone knew about the nightmares. No one dared interrupt them. Inside, Kael sat upright in bed, breathing hard. His hands trembled.
Blood.
Fire. Screaming children. The village. The order he could never take back. His reflection in the dark window looked less like a king, more like a murderer wearing a crown. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Before he answered, the door opened slightly. Lyra stepped inside carrying nothing but a small lantern. I heard. She hesitated. You sounded lonely. Not afraid. Lonely. No one had ever described his suffering that way. She slowly approached. Without permission. Without fear. She gently rested her hand against his scarred wrist. Silver warmth spread through the room. Not powerful. Not dramatic. Just peaceful. For the first time in years. The nightmares loosened their grip. Kael closed his eyes. He realized something terrifying. He had begun depending on her presence. Elsewhere, beneath the oldest tower of Blackthorn Castle, Lady Seraphine unlocked a forgotten iron door hidden behind centuries of dust. The royal blood archives. Shelves stretched endlessly into darkness. Thousands of ancient scrolls rested untouched. She searched for hours. Then, her fingers froze. One scroll bore a faded silver crescent. She carefully opened it. As candlelight danced across the parchment, her heartbeat quickened. No, she whispered. This can't be. The document revealed an ancient truth. Lyra Ashmore wasn't merely an abandoned Omega. She was the last surviving descendant of House Ashmore, the original royal bloodline that ruled Blackthorn long before Kael's ancestors claimed the throne. By ancient law, her claim to the kingdom surpassed every noble alive, even Kael's. Seraphine's hands shook. If this truth became public, the court would never accept her as queen. Years of ambition.
Gone.
7 years of careful planning. Destroyed by a girl who didn't even know who she truly was. For one brief moment, Seraphine considered telling the truth. Then ambition smothered conscience. She carried the scroll to a stone brazier. The flame caught instantly. Ancient history curled into black ash. She watched every word disappear. Every trace of Lyra's rightful heritage vanished into smoke. But burning the truth wasn't enough. She needed the kingdom to fear Lyra, to hate her, to demand her removal. Seraphine smiled slowly,
Coldly.
If the truth could not destroy the Omega, a lie would. She dipped a quill into black ink. By sunrise, forged documents would accuse Lyra of practicing forbidden moon magic to enchant the king. By tomorrow evening, the whispers inside the palace would become accusations. By the end of the week, the entire kingdom would believe its greatest enemy wasn't an invading army. It was the lonely girl who had only ever wanted a place to belong. And outside Lyra's chamber, one of the moon guardians suddenly lifted its head. Its low growl rolled through the silent corridor. Somewhere inside the castle, darkness had just taken its first step toward the throne. Morning arrived without warmth. A heavy gray sky stretched above Blackthorn Castle, swallowing the sun behind thick storm clouds. Snow drifted silently over the ancient towers, covering rooftops and statues alike until the entire kingdom looked trapped beneath a blanket of quiet sorrow. Yet beneath that silence, the palace had become louder than ever. Not with voices, with whispers. They slithered through marble corridors like invisible snakes. She enchanted the king. Didn't you see how he looks at her? The wolves obey her instead of him. She's using forbidden moon magic. An Omega cannot possess that power naturally. The lies spread exactly as Lady Seraphine had planned. Every servant repeated them. Every noble embellished them. Every frightened citizen believed them. Fear was easier to accept than miracles. Lyra noticed the change before anyone spoke a single word. The maids who once smiled now bowed, without meeting her eyes. The guards outside her chamber stood farther away. Servants left meals outside her door instead of entering. When she walked through the palace gardens, conversation stopped. Children who had once waved at her were quickly pulled behind their mothers. It felt painfully familiar. She had lived through this once before. Another home, another pack, another place where kindness slowly transformed into suspicion. She whispered to herself. So, it begins again. Kael noticed it too. The difference was, his reaction was far more dangerous. The council chamber echoed with heated debate as 20 of the kingdom's most powerful nobles gathered beneath enormous crystal chandeliers. Ancient banners hung from black stone walls. At the center stood the Alpha King, towering,
silent.
Watching. Lord Herrick, one of the oldest council members, struck his cane against the marble floor. Your Majesty. Kael said nothing. The rumors cannot continue. Silence. Another noble stood. The people are frightened. A third added, they believe the Omega has bewitched the throne. Kael's silver eyes slowly lifted. And you? The noble hesitated. I only repeat what the kingdom already believes. Kael descended the stone steps toward them. Each heavy footstep echoed through the chamber.
1,
2, 3. No one breathed. He stopped directly before Lord Herrick. Show me. The old lord frowned. Your Majesty? The proof. Silence. You accuse someone living beneath my protection. Another step. So. His deep voice filled the chamber. Show me the evidence. No one answered. Because there wasn't any. Only forged letters. Anonymous witnesses. Fear disguised as certainty. Kael looked around the room. You call yourselves leaders. His voice remained calm. But not one among you possesses the courage to distinguish truth from rumor. The silence became unbearable. Then, Lady Seraphine finally spoke. Graceful, measured, careful. Your Majesty. Every eye turned toward her. I do not believe Lady Lyra wishes this harm. Kael narrowed his eyes. But intentions do not always control magic. The room stirred. She continued softly. If even a small possibility exists that forbidden moon power influences your judgment. She lowered her gaze respectfully. Should we not investigate for the safety of the kingdom?
Perfect.
Not an accusation. A concern. Reasonable. Logical.
Deadly.
Several nobles immediately nodded. Exactly as she knew they would. Kael studied her expression. She appeared sincere, concerned, loyal. For years he would have trusted those eyes without hesitation. Today, something felt different. Something invisible. But before he could answer, the enormous chamber doors burst open. A terrified soldier stumbled inside. My king. Everyone turned. The eastern villages. He struggled for breath. They've been attacked. The room froze. Wolves.
Kael asked.
The soldier swallowed.
No.
A long pause. The survivors say. His voice trembled. The attackers carried silver fire. Every gaze slowly shifted toward Lyra's empty chair. Seraphine closed her eyes. As if heartbroken. Exactly the reaction she wanted everyone else to imitate. That evening, rain replaced snow. Cold droplets struck the palace windows like tiny fingers begging to be heard. Lyra sat alone inside the winter garden. The white roses no longer bloomed. Even they seemed to sense the growing darkness. She watched rain slide down the glass ceiling. Every drop reminded her of another tear she refused to shed. Footsteps approached quietly.
Kael.
He stood beside her without speaking. For several minutes. Only rain filled the silence. Finally he asked, Have you eaten? She smiled faintly. You always ask that first. You never answer. She looked down. I wasn't hungry. He already knew. The untouched meals outside her room had told him everything. Kael leaned against the stone railing. They're afraid. I know. They're wrong. I know. Another silence. Longer this time. Then Lyra whispered, Do you remember what I told you in the forest? Kael nodded. People always hurt what they fear. She smiled sadly. I was hoping. Her voice cracked slightly. I might finally be wrong. Something inside Kael broke. He wanted to promise everything would improve. That he would protect her. That tomorrow would be different. But he had worn a crown long enough to know. Some battles couldn't be won by swords. Later that night, Lyra wandered through the sleeping castle. She couldn't breathe inside her chamber. The walls felt too close.
Too heavy.
The palace had become another cage. She walked until she reached the northern balcony overlooking the endless forests beyond the kingdom. Frostveil. Even from this distance, she could almost imagine hearing wolves howl. Home. Not because it was comfortable. Because no one there expected her to become someone else. A soft growl interrupted her thoughts. The oldest moon guardian emerged from the darkness. He gently rested his enormous head against her shoulder. She buried trembling fingers into his fur. I don't belong here. The wolf whined softly. I never did. Tears finally escaped. Only 2. She quickly wiped them away. I don't want him to lose everything because of me. The wolf looked toward the king's tower, almost knowingly. Before dawn, Lyra made her decision. No farewell. No explanation. No dramatic goodbye. She folded the silver dress the palace servants had made for her, placed it carefully upon the bed, picked up her old wolf fur cloak, opened the window. Snowflakes drifted quietly into the room. She climbed onto the stone ledge. The moon guardians appeared below almost immediately, as though they had known. Lyra smiled through tear-filled eyes. Let's go home. The wolves disappeared into the darkness. She followed, not looking back once. Hours later, Kael awakened. Something felt wrong, terribly wrong. The strange peace that had filled his nightmares every night since Lyra arrived
Was gone.
He stood instantly. Her chamber, empty. The bed untouched. The room cold. Only one thing remained. Her worn wooden cup, half filled with dried mountain herbs. She hadn't taken it. Kael slowly picked it up. His enormous hand trembled. Not again. Years ago, he had failed to protect innocent people. Now, he had failed the one person who had begun healing him. A servant entered cautiously. My king. Kael didn't turn. Find her. My king, the storm. I said. His voice became dangerously quiet. Find her. The servant fled. Kael stood alone. The room suddenly felt far too large.
Too silent.
Too empty. Meanwhile, far beneath the castle, Seraphine smiled. Phase 1 had succeeded. The Omega had left willingly. No blood. No witnesses.
Perfect.
But then, a palace guard entered hurriedly. My lady, what is it? The king has ordered every royal scout into Frostveil. Her smile faded slightly. And he is going himself. Seraphine's heartbeat stopped for one terrifying second.
No.
She whispered. He wouldn't. The guard swallowed. He already has. For the first time, fear touched Seraphine's heart. Not because Lyra had escaped. Because Kael had abandoned the safety of his throne to chase her. A king risking his kingdom for one Omega was no longer acting from duty. He was acting from love. And love was far more difficult to defeat than politics. North of the kingdom, the storm raged across endless mountains. Snow whipped violently through the air. Visibility disappeared. Even the moon guardian struggled against the freezing wind. Lyra stumbled through the blizzard alone. Her cloak snapped wildly behind her. Her strength faded with every step. Then, the wind suddenly stopped. The snowfall settled. Before her stood an enormous stone gateway hidden beneath centuries of ice. Ancient wolf statues lined the entrance. Their eyes glowed with pale silver light. As Lyra stepped closer, the silver mark beneath her shoulder began burning. The frozen gates slowly opened by themselves. A haunting chorus of distant howls echoed from within. Hundreds. No, thousands. Deep inside the mountain, the forgotten moon wolves had been waiting. Not for a king. For their queen. Winter did not loosen its grip. It only grew crueler. Weeks passed. Then months. The rivers remained locked beneath thick ice. The forest stood silent beneath endless blankets of snow, while Blackthorn Kingdom slowly bled from wounds no battlefield had inflicted. The people no longer feared an enemy beyond the borders. They feared one another. Rumors had become accusations. Accusations became arrests. Neighbor distrusted neighbor. Pack turned against pack. The kingdom that Kael had spent years forging through strength was quietly collapsing beneath suspicion. And every night, the throne room felt larger, colder, emptier. King Kael Draven no longer slept. The nightmares had returned with greater cruelty than before. Flames swallowed another village. Children screamed through smoke. A young girl disappeared into a frozen forest. Then another face appeared. Lyra, walking away, without looking back. He always reached for her. He never arrived in time. Kael jolted awake. His breathing echoed through the royal chambers. Outside his door, the moon guardians remained. But there were only 9. The oldest guardian had left with Lyra. Even the wolves carried the weight of separation. Kael rose before dawn and crossed the silent palace alone. Servants bowed nervously. None dared speak. Since Lyra's disappearance, the king had become even quieter, even colder. But something had changed. His silence was no longer empty. It carried grief. Inside the council chamber, another argument erupted. Maps covered the great stone table. Red markers stretched across the northern borders. General Rowan struck the map with a gloved finger. "We've lost another fortress." Another commander spoke. "The eastern pacts refuse to answer the crown." A third lowered his voice. "Some believe the moon has abandoned us." The chamber fell silent as Kael entered. Every noble stood. Every voice vanished. Kael studied the map. 3 more villages burned. Supply roads destroyed. Border pacts refusing allegiance. This was no coincidence. Someone had been weakening the kingdom from within long before Lyra arrived. He finally looked toward Lady Seraphine. "You told me her departure would calm the people." His voice remained frighteningly calm. "It hasn't." Seraphine maintained perfect composure. "Fear leaves scars, Your Majesty. These things take time." Kael's silver eyes lingered on her face. Longer than usual. For the first time, he wondered whether the woman he had trusted for 7 years had ever truly spoken without purpose. Later that day, deep beneath the castle archives, an elderly librarian trembled as Kael approached. No soldiers. No advisors. Only the king. "I need every record concerning House Ashmore." The old man paled. My king. They were destroyed." Kael frowned. "When?" The librarian swallowed. "Several months ago." "By whose order?" Silence. The old man's hands shook. Kael stepped closer. "No lie." The librarian collapsed to one knee. "My Lady Seraphine ordered the records burned." Silence. Absolute silence. Something cold settled inside Kael's chest. Not rage.
Certainty.
One question remained.
Why?
Far beyond the kingdom, beyond the frozen rivers, beyond the jagged mountain peaks, Lyra stepped into a world forgotten by history. The sanctuary stretched beneath the mountain like another kingdom hidden inside the earth. Gigantic crystal formations glowed with soft silver light. Ancient waterfalls flowed through caves untouched by time. Moonlight entered through cracks in the stone ceiling, illuminating enormous stone statues of wolves standing guard over a vast valley hidden within the mountain itself. Hundreds, no, thousands of wolves watched her. Black wolves, silver wolves, white wolves larger than horses, old wolves scarred by centuries. Young cubs playing fearlessly between them. Not one growled. Not one showed hostility. Instead, every wolf lowered its head. The sound echoed through the valley like distant thunder. One by one, hundreds of wolves kneeling. Lyra stood frozen. Her voice barely escaped. "You've mistaken me for someone else." A deep growl rolled across the valley. The oldest white guardian walked toward an ancient stone altar standing beneath a waterfall. Upon the altar rested a weathered crown forged from silver branches and moonstone. Not a royal crown. Something older. The guardian looked at Lyra, then toward the crown. Only then did she understand. The wolves hadn't been protecting her all these years. They had been waiting until she was ready. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. The sanctuary transformed Lyra. Not through comfort, through truth. An elderly blind woman named Melis, the last moon keeper, welcomed her without surprise. "I wondered how long destiny would keep you waiting." Lyra stared. "You know me?" Melis smiled gently. "I knew your mother." The words stole Lyra's breath. For years, she had believed everyone connected to her past was gone. Each evening, Melis taught her the forgotten history of the moon bloodline. The silver mark on Lyra's shoulder was never a curse. It was the crest of the first queen. The moon healing gift was never ordinary magic. It was the power meant to unite wolves who had forgotten how to trust one another. Every lesson shattered another lie she had carried since childhood. She learned to command her gift without fear, to heal without collapsing, to call wolves across impossible distances. Even the weather seemed to answer her emotions. When she found peace,
Snow softened.
when grief returned, storms gathered. But her greatest transformation wasn't magical. It was emotional. The frightened Omega, who once apologized for existing slowly, disappeared. A quieter confidence replaced her. She no longer lowered her eyes while speaking. She no longer expected rejection before kindness. She no longer saw herself through the cruelty of those who abandoned her. One evening, while standing atop a cliff overlooking the sanctuary, Melis joined her. "You still think about him?" Lyra smiled sadly. "I try not to. But you do. Every day." She closed her eyes. "I left because I wanted to save him. And instead, I only made him carry another loss." The old woman rested a gentle hand upon Lyra's shoulder. Love that demands sacrifice often mistakes silence for protection. Lyra looked toward the distant south, toward Blackthorn, toward the man she had tried so hard to forget. At that exact moment, the silver mark beneath her shoulder burned. Not painfully, urgently. Miles away, Kael stood upon the highest tower of Blackthorn Castle. A cold wind whipped his black cloak behind him. Below, chaos consumed the capital. Food riots, pack disputes, political unrest. Everything he had built was breaking apart. General Rowan rushed onto the tower. "My king."
Kael turned.
"The western border has fallen." Another messenger followed immediately. "The northern forts are under siege." Then another. "The Crimson Legion has crossed the river." Enemy banners. Hundreds of them.
No.
Thousands. The neighboring kingdom had waited patiently for weakness. Now they marched toward Blackthorn. Kael looked across the horizon. This battle, even he could not win alone. Inside the throne room, Lady Seraphine stood before the council. "This is precisely why we warned His Majesty." She looked appropriately sorrowful. His obsession with the Omega blinded him. Several nobles nodded. "The kingdom pays the price." She had almost won. Almost.
And
A sound rolled across the valley. One howl.
deep.
Ancient. Powerful. Every person inside the throne room froze. A second howl answered. Then another. Then hundreds. The castle windows trembled. The earth itself seemed to vibrate. Soldiers rushed onto the walls. "My king." Kael reached the battlements overlooking the northern plains. Every defender stood speechless. Far beyond the snow-covered fields, a moving sea of silver spread across the horizon. At first, it looked like another storm. Then shapes emerged. Wolves. Hundreds. Then thousands. Massive moon wolves raced across the frozen earth in perfect formation. At their head, riding upon the largest white wolf anyone had ever seen, was Lyra. Her white hair flowed behind her like moonlight caught by the wind. She no longer wore patched furs. Instead, she wore flowing silver and white robes trimmed with ancient wolf symbols. The silver crescent upon her shoulder glowed brilliantly beneath the winter sky. She sat tall,
Calm.
unafraid. Not the frightened Omega who had entered the palace months ago. Not the lonely girl abandoned by her pack. She looked like a queen. Kael forgot to breathe. For one impossible heartbeat, the battlefield disappeared. There was only her. Lyra lifted her eyes. Across the enormous distance, they found his. Neither smiled, neither spoke. Yet everything they had been unable to say during months of separation passed silently between them. "I'm alive. I never stopped looking."
I'm sorry. So am I.
Behind Lyra, thousands of moon wolves stopped simultaneously. The earth fell silent. Then, from somewhere beneath Blackthorn Castle, a deafening roar exploded through the stone foundations. The ground cracked violently. Ancient chains snapped deep below the royal capital. Lady Seraphine slowly closed her eyes. Her final gamble had begun. Beneath the castle, something that should have remained imprisoned forever had just awakened. The roar did not end. It deepened. It rolled beneath Blackthorn Castle like thunder trapped beneath the earth, shaking towers that had stood for centuries. Stone cracked. Chandeliers crashed from vaulted ceilings. Soldiers lost their footing as the very foundation of the royal capital lurched beneath them.
Then
The courtyard exploded. Ancient black stone burst upward in a violent eruption. Dust swallowed the morning sky. People screamed. Horses reared in panic. The ground split apart until a massive chasm carved through the heart of the capital. Something moved beneath the darkness. Not a wolf. Not a man. Something older. A colossal claw emerged first, larger than a carriage, covered in obsidian scales veined with molten crimson light. Then another. Finally, the beast pulled itself into the daylight. It stood nearly as tall as the castle walls. Its body resembled an ancient wolf twisted by centuries of hatred, armored in black stone instead of fur. Crimson fire leaked from between jagged teeth, and its glowing eyes carried only endless rage. The oldest legends had called it the Hollow Fang, the devourer of kings. The creature sealed beneath Blackthorn nearly 500 years earlier after slaughtering 3 royal bloodlines. The prison had never broken. Until today. A silence of pure terror swept across the kingdom. Then the monster roared again. The sound shattered stained-glass windows across the capital. People fled in every direction. Children cried. Guards abandoned formation. Even experienced warriors trembled. For the first time in years, fear reached the giant Alpha King. Not fear for himself. Fear for his people. Kael stepped forward. His great sword slid from its sheath with a sound like steel tearing through ice. General Rowan grabbed his arm. My king. Kael never looked away from the beast. Evacuate the city. You cannot face that alone.
no.
His voice remained calm. I can't. He walked anyway. One man. Against a nightmare. The Hollow Fang lowered its enormous head. Its burning eyes locked onto Kael. The Alpha King released his aura without restraint. Power exploded through the battlefield. The force bent banners, cracked frozen stone. Weaker wolves instinctively lowered themselves. The Hollow Fang merely smiled, then charged. The collision shook the entire city. Steel met claw. Fire met frost. Kael was thrown backward through a stone wall before crashing into the palace courtyard. Blood ran from the corner of his mouth. He rose anyway. Again. 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 Every strike carved glowing wounds across the monster's armor. Every wound healed within seconds. The beast was ancient, patient, unstoppable. Another swipe sent Kael sliding across shattered marble. His sword slipped from his grasp. For the first time since becoming king, he found himself unable to stand. High above the battlefield, Lyra watched from the back of the great white wolf. Her heart stopped. Kael. Without another thought, she leaped. The enormous wolf raced forward. Hundreds followed, then thousands. The valley thundered beneath pounding paws. The moon wolves descended like a silver tide crashing into darkness. Their synchronized howl drowned out the screams of battle. The sound echoed through mountains, forests, and frozen rivers. It was not a cry of war. It was a call, a promise. A kingdom would not stand alone. Lyra reached Kael just as the Hollow Fang lifted one massive claw for the killing blow. She spread her arms. No! Silver light erupted from her body. Not as a beam, as a wave. Moonlight poured across the battlefield, washing over broken walls, frightened soldiers, and wounded wolves alike. The monster's claw froze inches above Kael. Time itself seemed to hesitate. Kael looked up. Lyra stood before him, not hiding behind him,
Protecting him.
He had spent his life shielding everyone else. Now someone had chosen to shield him. His chest tightened with an emotion stronger than pain. Hope. The Hollow Fang roared, breaking through the silver light. Darkness collided with moonlight. The shockwave blasted soldiers backward. Lyra stumbled. The monster's corruption was too powerful. Its hatred had grown for centuries. She could not defeat it alone. Kael forced himself to his feet. He picked up his sword.
Then
He looked at Lyra. Not as a king. Not as an alpha. simply as a man. Our strength was never meant to stand apart. She met his eyes. Understanding bloomed instantly. The prophecy had never spoken of one savior. It had always spoken of two broken souls healing one another. Kael extended his hand. Without hesitation, Lyra placed hers in his. The silver mark upon her shoulder blazed brighter than the sun. Ancient runes appeared beneath their feet. The moon wolves lifted their heads toward the heavens. Their voices joined together. One howl, thousands of hearts. One destiny. Kael's alpha aura no longer crushed. It protected. Lyra's healing power no longer weakened her. It flowed through every wolf answering her call. Light and strength intertwined. The battlefield disappeared beneath a storm of silver radiance. The hollow fang lunged. Kael met it head-on. This time, he wasn't alone. His blade pierced the creature's armored chest while Lyra's hands rested against the steel. Moonlight flooded through the wound, not destroying the beast, healing what hatred had corrupted. The monster screamed, not in rage, in relief. Its obsidian armor cracked apart. Beneath centuries of darkness, a magnificent silver wolf emerged, the original guardian, twisted long ago by betrayal and endless war. The hollow fang had never been born evil. It had been abandoned. Just like Lyra, the great wolf lowered its head before her, then dissolved into countless particles of silver light that drifted peacefully into the sky. Silence followed. Gentle, beautiful. The war was over. Far across the courtyard, Lady Seraphine fell to her knees. No. Her voice shook. No. Everything had gone wrong. The monster she believed would destroy Lyra had instead revealed the truth. Nobles stared at her. General Rowan stepped forward holding charred documents recovered from the archives. The forged records. Another captain produced testimony from the frightened librarian. A palace maid confessed to carrying Seraphine's secret messages. Every lie unraveled, one thread after another. Seraphine looked toward Kael desperately. I did it for the kingdom. Kael's silver eyes held only sorrow.
No.
His voice was quiet. You did it because you could not imagine a kingdom where love mattered more than power. She laughed, then cried, then laughed again. Years of ambition collapsed into madness. She reached for a hidden dagger, not toward Lyra, toward herself. Before the blade found its mark, Lyra gently caught her wrist. Seraphine stared in disbelief. Why? Tears blurred her vision. Why would you save me? Lyra's voice remained soft. Because someone has to end this without creating another orphan. Seraphine broke. Not because she had been defeated. Because mercy hurt more than punishment ever could. The guards quietly led her away. Days later, the kingdom gathered beneath a sky washed clean by spring rain. Snow had begun melting from the mountains. Flowers pushed through frozen earth. The first wolves wandered openly beside humans without fear. Thousands filled the royal courtyard. Soldiers, farmers, children, nobles. Every pack, every village. Kael stood before them, wearing neither crown nor ceremonial armor. Only simple black clothing. For the first time, he looked less like a conqueror, more like a man. He faced his people. I ruled through fear. His voice echoed across the silent courtyard. I believed strength alone could protect this kingdom. He paused. I was wrong. No excuses. No blame. Only truth. I cannot erase the lives lost because of my decisions. His gaze lowered. But I will spend the rest of my life earning the future they deserved.
Silence. Then
he turned toward Lyra. She wore the ancient moon crown. Not heavy gold. Not glittering jewels. Only intertwined silver branches that seemed alive beneath the morning sun. Kael slowly descended the palace steps. Before the entire kingdom, the giant Alpha King knelt. Not because prophecy demanded it. Not because wolves watched. Not because history required a symbol. He knelt because love had finally become greater than pride. His deep voice carried across the courtyard. Lyra Ashmore. He lifted his eyes. You taught a broken king that strength without compassion is only another form of weakness. He smiled. The first genuine smile many had ever witnessed. If you will have me, he extended his hand. Walk beside me. Not above, not behind. Beside. Tears shimmered in Lyra's gray eyes. The frightened Omega, who had once believed she deserved nothing,
was gone.
In her place stood a woman who had crossed loneliness, betrayal, exile, and war without allowing bitterness to claim her heart. She took his hand. I thought the forest was the only place I belonged. She looked across the people filling the courtyard. The wolves. The children. The kingdom.
Now.
A gentle smile touched her lips. I think home was never a place. She squeezed Kael's hand. It was always the people willing to choose each other. The crowd erupted, not with cheers alone, with howls. Thousands of wolves lifted their voices toward the rising silver moon that still lingered faintly in the brightening sky. Humans joined them, not in fear, in unity. And for the first time in generations, no one looked at an Omega and saw weakness. No one looked at an Alpha and saw only power. They saw two souls who had healed each other, and in doing so, had healed an entire kingdom.
The end.